Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the Select Committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about my personal knowledge of and experience with federal agencies being weaponized against U.S. citizens. Senator Grassley has just described the most egregious examples undertaken by multiple actors and agencies to undermine and sabotage our joint investigations. But to begin, let me be clear. Throughout my testimony, I am not talking about the men and women in government who conduct themselves with integrity and patriotism. But at the outset, it is important to recognize corrupt individuals within federal agencies that I am talking about are not acting alone. They operate as vital partners of the left-wing political movement that includes most members of the mainstream media, big tech social media giants, global institutions and foundations, Democrat Party operatives, and elected officials. As the Twitter files reveal, these actors work in concert to defeat their political opponents and promote left-wing ideology and government control over our lives. My eyes began opening to this reality with the disclosure of how the Obama administration weaponized the IRS to harass Tea Party groups by denying them tax-exempt status. My personal knowledge and experience with agency corruption began in 2015 when I became chairman of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. My first investigation ultimately revealed the extensive editing of then FBI Director James Comey of his July 5, 2016 statement that exonerated Secretary Clinton regarding her use of a private email server for official business. The edits were clearly made to downplay the seriousness of her actions. It is important to note those partisan edits were made by the same cast of characters in the FBI that would initiate and drive the corrupt Russian-Trump collusion investigation. During our investigation of the FBI's involvement in the Russian collusion hoax, Senator Grassley and I uncovered and made public highly partisan text messages between FBI employees Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Strzok's December 15, 2016 test, quote, "Think our sisters have begun leaking like mad. Scorned, worried, and political, they're kicking into overdrive, has never been given the attention it deserves." In 2022 interview with Jeff Girth, Strzok said he now believes, quote, that it is more likely the text came not from the CIA, but from senior levels of the U.S. government or Congress. Who might those leakers be? Why aren't reporters who received the leaks outraged at being fed false information? And why haven't they blown the whistle on the leakers? Why didn't the mainstream media robustly investigate how they were all duped? The answer is they weren't duped. They were complicit in creating and fostering the political turmoil our country has been experiencing over the last 6 years. Those leaks were a key ingredient in the most destructive, political, dirty trick in U.S. history, the creation and promotion of the false Russia-Trump collusion narrative. To be most effective, however, that narrative relied on coordination between government actors and the media. And the left had allies in the FBI. Unable to verify the Steele dossier, the FBI offered Christopher Steele $1 million to provide verification. By December 2016, the FBI knew they had investigated Steele's primary subsource as a Russian spy. In the main body of the Department of Justice Inspector General's report on FISA abuse, FBI official Bill Priestap is quoted saying the FBI, quote, didn't have any indication whatsoever, unquote, of Russian influence on the Steele dossier. Our investigation uncovered redacted footnotes to that same document that completely contradicted that statement. Why would Priestap's false statement appear in the report, but the truth be hidden in classified footnotes? 14 months later, in February 2018, the FBI still briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee that the dossier had validity. When the Mueller report found no evidence of collusion, the left engineered an impeachment of President Trump. The cooperation between the House Intelligence Committee and the impeachment whistleblower remains murky. Then Chairman Adam Schiff originally denied his committee had contact with the whistleblower prior to the filing of the complaint, a claim Schiff later attempted to walk back. The genesis of the impeachment saga has yet to be fully investigated. It needs to be. Prior to the impeachment proceedings, Hunter Biden's obvious conflicts of interest in Ukraine became public, and Senator Grassley and I began investigating. We didn't target Joe and Hunter Biden. Their actions demanded it. On December 9, 2019, the FBI issued a grand jury subpoena and took possession of Hunter Biden's laptop from John Paul McIsaac, a computer shop owner in Wilmington, Delaware. As the FBI left his shop with the laptop, Mr. McIsaac recalled one agent saying, quote, "It is our experience that nothing ever happens to people that don't talk about these things," unquote. That statement was the opening salvo in a coordinated effort over the next 10 months to sabotage any public revelation of Hunter Biden's laptop or any wrongdoing connected to the Bidens. Senator Grassley has provided a number of examples of that sabotage, and we will release a report that goes into far greater detail than we have time for today. When available, I hope everyone will read it. Perhaps the most egregious and effective act of sabotage against the truth was the public letter signed by 51 former intelligence officials that claimed the laptop had, quote, "all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation," unquote. That letter itself was an information operation that interfered with and impacted the 2020 presidential election to a far greater extent than anything Russia ever could have hoped to achieve. Each of those intelligence officials needs to be interviewed to determine how that letter was masterminded. While we all condemned the violence on January 6th, we all condemned the violence on January 6th. The fervor in which the Biden Department of Justice has pursued those protesters and rioters stands in stark contrast to their lack of interest in the summer of 2020 rioters. Serious questions regarding instances of unequal application of justice and violation of January 6 defendants' due process rights remain unanswered. SWAT team arrests and treatment of prisoners are legitimate concerns. And neither the Senate nor House investigations adequately explained why the Capitol was so woefully unprepared or how many federal agents and informants were in the crowd. COVID has exposed the awesome power that can be misused by government officials. The loss of basic freedoms has been nothing less than breathtaking. Our response to the pandemic has been a miserable failure. A miserable failure. Over 1 million lives lost. The human toll of the economic devastation caused by shutdowns that did not work. And let me move on. I think, Dr. Gigan, you were talking about turning what you don't think is pass-through income, it's really salary type of income, and turning it into pass-through and avoiding the Medicare tax. I mean, is that correct? So I mean, an example of that would be, let's say you're being paid royalty on a book, which in that case I would actually, from my standpoint, having been a manufacturer, operating pass-through income businesses, when you're making income off of manufacturing, I would think that's like real business income and should be treated as pass-through. But a royalty on a book, I would say that probably should be attributed to people as real, like, salary income. Would you agree?
Yeah, labor income.
So what you're talking about in terms of that tax dodge is exactly what President Biden did when he turned royalty income in through, I think it's subchapter S, into pass-through income and didn't pay the Medicare tax, correct? Now, that's what you're talking about in terms of people turning what should be Medicare taxable income into pass-through income, right?
Yes, and same for, a private practice physician or others. They're all legally using the tax code, and it's just
So let me ask you this question.
You have drawn a lot of interest about Hunter Biden and some of his activities and some of the investigations. I want to draw a larger question. Do you think that impacts Joe Biden? Do you think President Biden is corrupt?
Yes. So let's go back to end of 2016, beginning of 2017, when the news story broke about possible Trump campaign collusion with Russia. That's now been proven to be completely false narrative, a hoax. I don't really see any members of the media outraged by the fact that they were fed false information. It was through my investigation we found that the FBI knew that the Steele dossier was actually prepared by somebody they had suspected investigated as being a Russian agent. So they knew the Steele dossier was Russian disinformation itself. And yet they allowed the Mueller probe to special counsel go on. This happened for 2 years. Nobody's ever apologized for it. The media's never made amends. The media's never called out the people that gave them false information. I started investigating Hunter Biden with Chuck Grassley. We obtained Treasury records that show a vast web of foreign financial entanglements. Now again, these are U.S. records. We are interviewing U.S. persons. And yet the media is reporting, because they're being fed false information, that I am soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the only person that introduced Russian disinformation to our investigatory record was my ranking member, Democrat Senator Gary Peters. So now we know that Anthony Blinken, who was working for Joe Biden's campaign, now Secretary of State, he's the one that contacted Mike Morrell, I think former acting CIA director, to gin up this letter from 51 former foreign intelligence officials, said that the Hunter laptop had all the earmarks of Russian disinformation. Now, our intelligence community, our law enforcement, knew the Hunter laptop was real. They had it in their possession as of December 2019. The FBI, by the way, immediately went to pre-debunk the laptop story in case it ever surfaced. Because as they leave the shop, Mr. McIsaac will look over the show and say, hey, by the way, it's our experience that people who don't talk about these things don't get in trouble. Then the FBI provides us an unsolicited briefing in August of 2020 saying we're targets of Russian disinformation based on nothing. They had nothing to show. I knew it was a setup. It was. Designed in case that was ever off justice, which it was, by the way. The day after Chuck Grassley and I issued our report, September 20th, 2022, or 28th, Mr. McIsaac called us up. He finally felt safe enough to go public with that laptop. Again, that laptop is real. The information contained in that is real. The Treasury records that show this vast web of compromising foreign financial entanglements is real. Now we know through more Treasury records, an additional 6 Biden family members were basically on the take. You don't think that's corrupt? You don't think that's sleazy? You don't think that compromised the American president? So again, what the mainstream media has been reporting is that I'm some conveyor of misinformation, that I'm a conspiracy theorist. No, I've been conveying the truth time and time and time again. And nobody's ever been proving me wrong on these things. I keep getting proven correct. And I've definitely been proven correct in terms of Hunter Biden and his corruption and his influence peddling and those conflicts of interest, and how the Biden family Inc.'s sale of the Biden family name certainly compromises President Biden. Remember, that was a whole issue around the Russian collusion hoax with Trump, right? Can you imagine if you have a United States president has these financial dealings with one of our adversaries? That's why the press bought that lie, hook, line, and sinker.
So if you believe he is corrupt, should he be impeached?
Well, first of all, he would never be convicted in the Senate. So I'm not sure we want to go down that road again. I think Democrats have done that time and time again. It's not helpful. I think you should be impeached in Mayorkas. If Anthony Blinken doesn't resign, he ought to be impeached as well. But those are two people I think the House should impeach, because I think that would just be revealing in terms of what the impeachment hearings would be. We need to understand how our border is completely wide open and that impact on America. And now what Secretary Blinken did during the campaign. I mean, can you think of a greater fraud perpetrated on the American electorate than what Anthony Blinken did with that letter from 51 former intelligence officials? I mean, again, it's all collusion hoax. I mean, undermining our 2016 election, right? It was a lie. What was a lie was in 2020, perpetrated by the Biden campaign, and then Joe Biden lied in the debate following that. That interfered into our election to a far greater extent than anything Russia or China ever could hope to accomplish. I mean, think of that. Think of that interference of that one letter and those lies by Joe Biden.
Chairman, Mr. Edwards, first of all, I agree with you. I think the overall solution here is to simplify our tax code. That would solve all the problems. That's the root cause, a very complex tax code. I fear that the $80 billion is just a $80 billion Band-Aid. It's not going to work. And of course, what I'm concerned about, I expressed this with Commissioner Werfel as well, is that $80 billion will not be spent in an impartial way. Highly concerned about partisanship in these federal agencies, law enforcement, and the IRS. And we've got two examples. Mr. Chairman, I hope we can get your cooperation with trying to extract information on the IRS visit to, for example, journalist Matt Taibbi. We got a response. It's a non-responsive response, but we'll continue to follow up on that. But I want to talk about another thing that's just popping in the news in terms of partisanship. And Mr. Chairman, you received a letter together with Ranking Member Crapo and Senator Grassley from the attorney for a IRS whistleblower who's claiming partisanship in a high-profile IRS investigation. They are asking for whistleblower protection, and they're asking to be interviewed. And my understanding is that they don't want to be interviewed by the House and the Senate. They'd like to do it one time. You know, I would request that you cooperate with their request. I'd ask that you enter this letter into the record. Mr. Chairman, can you enter this letter into the record?
Without objection, so ordered.
And I would also ask, if we do arrange that interview, I would like to be part of that interview. I'd like to be present when we interview that whistleblower, because the news reports widely are assuming that that is Hunter Biden. And of course, the chairman's always talking about wealthy tax cheats. Well, let's describe a wealthy tax cheat. Hunter Biden became a board member on Burisma in April or May of 2014. 3 years later, his financial advisor, business partner, the Biden family financial advisor, Eric Schwerin, sends him an email saying, hey, Hunter, you understated your income by $400,000 in 2014. I mean, this is 2 or 3 years later, right? Now, eventually, Hunter Biden paid about $2 million of delinquent taxes, but he didn't pay them. A Hollywood attorney named Kevin Morris made that payment in May of 2022, 5 years after Mr. Schwerin told him that you underreported income by $400,000, where he must have underreported income by a lot more than $400,000 if he's making a $2 million tax payment. So the concern we have now, according to this letter, is that entire IRS investigatory team has been pulled off the Hunter Biden case. My question for you, Mr. Fort, in your time in the IRS, in the investigatory division, the criminal division, was there ever another instance where an entire IRS investigatory team was pulled off a tax case?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So yeah, I've spent almost 30 years with IRS criminal investigation. I'm not aware of a situation such as that, but again, when I retired from the organization at the end of 2020, I was in charge of about 3,000 people, including 2,100 agents, so I can't say with certainty whether or not that happened.
So again, we have a whistleblower here. He's seeking whistleblower protection. Sounds like the House has granted it. I'm not sure what the Senate is doing. This is the committee of jurisdiction. I hope you grant whistleblower protection and cooperate in an interview with this whistleblower, because we need to find out this information, claiming partisanship in the Hunter Biden investigation. And now, the fact that the Justice Department has removed the entire investigatory team off of the case, that just smacks of partisanship and erodes the American people's confidence that the IRS will be fair and impartial and administer justice in the tax code equally. Do you agree that that erodes confidence in the IRS, this recent revelation?
So even though I've been gone from the government for 2 years, federal law prohibits me from discussing any specific taxpayer at all. But I would just agree that it's a serious allegation.
Well, again, in having an IRS investigatory team pulled off of any case would certainly get you scratching your head, right? Highly concerned about what's pulling off here?
Again, in my experience, I'm not personally aware of a situation such as that, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen during my tenure.
Okay, and again, Mr. Chairman, I would also like your cooperation in my request for information from Commissioner Werfel on the Matt Taibbi. We're going to try and get from Mr. Taibbi a release to have the IRS release those records, because right now the IRS is claiming they can't do that. We also asked, by the way, general questions, which the IRS also didn't respond to us. So I'm going to need your help if we're going to get to the bottom of that potential partisanship within the IRS.
I'm going to respond when you're done. You're just over your time. Are you done?
Yep.
Great. I am aware of the matter that Senator Johnson's brought up, as has been my practice on 6103 protected matters. I have been pursuing this issue on a bipartisan basis here with Ranking Member Crapo, and we are going to continue to do so. Given 6103 and the sensitive nature of the information for all involved, there just isn't anything more I can say about it now. Okay.
Now, Director Wray, I'm assuming you've seen and read the letter that Senator Grassley wrote to you and Attorney General Garland on October 24th?
I'm generally aware of it.
Oh, you ought to read it. Let me read some segments to you. The FBI maintained over 40 confidential human sources that provided criminal information related to Joe Biden, James Biden, and Hunter Biden. An essential question that must be answered in this: did the FBI investigate the information or shut it down? Certainly there's a host of reasons to conclude that they attempted to shut it down. It goes on. It has been alleged that the basis for shutting down the investigative activity, shutting it down, was an August 2020 assessment created by FBI Supervisory Intelligence Analyst Brian Auten. That assessment was used by FBI headquarters team to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as disinformation and cause investigative activity to cease. It goes on. Analyst Brian Auten opened the aforementioned assessment, which was used by the Foreign Influence Task Force to seek out CHS holdings at FBI field offices across the country relating to the Biden family and falsely discredit them as foreign disinformation. My staff calls that catch and kill. And by the way, it was that same task force that gave Senator Grassley and I our unsolicited briefing that was later leaked to the media to smear me and impact my 2022 election. Senator Grassley concludes, there appears to be an effort within the Justice Department and FBI to shut down investigative activity relating to the Biden family. Such decisions point to significant political bias infecting the decision-making of not only the Attorney General and FBI Director, but also line agents and prosecutors. Our republic cannot survive such a political infection, and you have an obligation to this country to clear the air. Let me ask another, and by the way, I'd ask that this unanimous consent that this letter be entered in the record, and also this column that appeared in the Wall Street Journal published yesterday. Have you read this one? More on the stifled Hunter Biden probe.
I have seen that.
Okay, we'll enter that in the record. Again, this column is written based on the October 23rd Judiciary Committee interview with former U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, who was tapped by Attorney General Barr to vet information related to Ukrainian corruption and pass along credible material to offices with ongoing investigations. I'll get some highlights here. The FBI office in Pittsburgh couldn't take any steps without the review and approval of FBI headquarters. Mr. Brady describes a reluctance on the part of the FBI to really do any tasking related to allegations of Ukrainian corruption broadly, and then specifically anything that intersected with Hunter Biden and his role in Burisma. FBI headquarters had to sign off on every assignment, no matter how small or routine, and that this sometimes required 17 different people, mostly at the headquarter level. Mr. Brady said he'd never in his DOJ career seen anything like it. Mr. Brady says his office was informed by members of the Pittsburgh FBI team that they had been instructed by headquarters not to affirmatively share information with the Brady team. He said he was surprised to learn that the FBI possessed the Hunter Biden laptop since 2019. He heard that through public reports. Senator Grassley's letter concludes that he has obtained names from his whistleblower, 25 Department of Justice FBI personnel, to interview at a future date, and he's also requesting a bunch of information. Will you provide those FBI personnel for interviews with his office in mind, and will you provide those documents?
Well, I'll have to review the specific requests, and we'll see how we can be helpful.
Okay, well, I'll hand you this letter. Final point I want to make. I was briefed a couple weeks ago by members of the FBI on what Senator Blumenthal are doing to try and unredact a lot of the information on the 9/11 event, okay? Now, the briefers seem to be people of integrity, like I think the vast majority of the men and women that work in the FBI, the 38,000 field agents. So again, they were people with integrity. The problem is that they gave me 3 different examples of redacted and then unredacted to explain it. And the redactions made sense of those 3 examples, but I had to make the point. The problem I have is I simply cannot trust what the FBI is providing me. And I don't say that with any joy in my heart. That's a travesty. The American people want to believe and have trust in the FBI. We want credibility and integrity restored to your institution. But Director Wray, you have not done that since assuming office. And I could go through a long laundry list of the reasons why that trust has been violated. I don't have it right now. I'm happy to sit down and meet with you and go over these things in detail. But I would say, because they asked me, what can we do to restore trust? Start being transparent. My final point is, and this is actually a question, why is it, and this makes no sense, I'm an elected U.S. Senator. I have the highest security clearance. Why is it that unelected members of the FBI can see the documents unredacted, but I can't, even in a secure briefing room? That makes no sense whatsoever, but that's exactly how federal law enforcement, Department of Justice, the FBI, who are the law, remain above the law, remain above scrutiny, and completely scorn our constitutional responsibility and authority to provide oversight. We just can't do it, as the chairman was talking about earlier, about how you've basically ignored his requests for credit for or questions for the record.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
You may.
So needless to say, I disagree with your characterization, not only of my own performance, but of our workforce. I will tell you, when it comes to trust and confidence, the number of people applying to be special agents of the FBI has gone up dramatically since I've been FBI director. And in fact, in your home state of Wisconsin, it's gone up about 160-something%, which is one of the highest in the country. So I see an FBI every day that conducts themselves with integrity and professionalism and selflessness and rigor. And I do not accept the characterization of our performance in this particular case.
That is not how I characterized it. I'm talking about
may I
partisanship
finish,
at the
Mr. Chairman?
top with some specific partisan actors. I said the vast majority of the 38,000 are people of integrity.
And the idea that I, as a Republican appointee and a lifelong Republican, am biased in the way that you are describing makes absolutely no sense.
I'm happy to read you chapter and verse of all the reasons why that credibility has been destroyed.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start at the outset. I'm an accountant. I value audits. My wife was an IRS auditor, so we need that. There's no doubt about it. Okay, you can argue legitimately, to what extent, how many auditors, how much we should spend on it. That's legitimate conversation. I do have to admit, though, every time I hear the chairman or the chairman of the Finance Committee say the word wealthy tax cheat, I think of the name Hunter Biden and all of the Biden family members who have been participating in his influence peddling grifts. I think it's interesting, as much as this hearing is emphasizing on audits, that when Senator Grassley and I were conducting our very legitimate investigation, using our constitutional responsibility of oversight, when we were investigating tax cheating, influence peddling, money coming in, tens of millions of dollars from foreign entities to impact potentially U.S. policy. Democrat senators, our ranking members, not only frustrated, I would say obstructed our investigation by falsely claiming we were soliciting and disseminating Russian disinformation. Now, that just happened to parrot what we've now found out the FBI set up their Foreign Influence Task Force, what they were doing in their catch and kill operation, find derogatory information that was being developed by 40 confidential human sources, and then go kill it. Go say, no, don't look into that. Don't go down that investigatory hole, because that's Russian disinformation. So the question I have based on that, Professor Sarin, it's obvious we have a dual system of justice applied to tax compliance. When somebody is connected politically as Hunter Biden, when his investigatory team allows the statute of limitations to expire on the most serious tax evasion charges, what does that dual system of justice, what does that do in terms of taxpayer compliance?
So, Senator Johnson, I actually want to take a step even higher, but with your sort of theme of democracy and heart. In this country today, we have a two-tiered tax system, as you acknowledge. Your constituents who are wage earners are already paying everything that they owe, and a very small proportion of very wealthy individuals and large corporations have the opportunity to...
Okay, and that was your testimony. Again, I want you to speak to the fact that the president's son is largely skating because they allowed the statute of limitations to run. What does that do to compliance in terms of Americans' attitude toward that, Professor Hendren? I've got other things I need to get to here.
I have very little to say on Hunter Biden. It's a very small portion of the tax gap.
That is true, but it's a very large portion in terms of Americans' attitude toward our dual system of justice.
So
Mr. Edwards, what do you think that does in terms of the public opinion of complying with taxes when one wealthy, connected individual basically avoids prosecution?
I agree, and it shows a general problem. There's a huge IRS management problem. We ought to fix IRS management before anything else. The IRS, lost or destroyed 30 million tax returns in Ogden, Utah. They don't have a good explanation for that. The huge theft of thousands of high-end tax returns a couple years ago. There's a big management
politically motivated theft and then distribution to ProPublica. Okay, that's politically motivated. I want to turn to the solution here. Again, I'm all for auditing. We're always going to need it. The solution is simplifying and rationalizing our tax code. I developed this chart years ago. I think it's quite interesting. This goes back to 1959 and shows the top marginal tax rate. To what extent were we going to punish success, and then the extent to which we were successful at punishing success. It's remarkable. Over 60-some years, we've had as top tax rate as high as 91%, 70%, 50%, 28, 31, 39.6, 35. Now we're at 37%. But over that 60-year time period, the average percent of GDP that we've raised in revenue is 17.3%. It doesn't change much because our tax code is so complex and as a result so difficult to comply with. It is notable that even after the tax cuts from 2018, the last 3 years has been above that average, 17.9, 19.6%. Last year was 18.2%. So increasing tax rates is not going to work. I would say dramatically, and I mean dramatically simplifying, but also use the term rationalizing. Our tax code is completely irrational. We have different forms of tax rates on different kinds of incomes. I mean, income ought to be income. From my standpoint, it ought to be based on cash generation. There's so many ways of simplifying this, and right there, you would dramatically increase compliance because, again, if tax rates are kept low, it's easy to comply with. There's the solution. Let's quit talking about sending more agents to harass Americans, and let's talk about the real solution, which is simplification and rationalization. Would any of you like to comment on that?
I would just like to comment, Professor Sarin's chart that was put up by the chairman is a fascinating chart. I would differ from Senator Romney in that it's true that modern businesses got complex. A lot of what drives that chart, frankly, is corporations making extremely sophisticated structures to avoid tax. They don't try to do things that are illegal. It's just that the tax code is so gray, they push the limits, and that's what I experienced at 5 years of PwC. That's what they try to do, push to the limit of a very gray code.
Senator Merkley.